It's important that South African retail owners ensure that they have implemented all precautions related to the Consumer Protection Act and also safeguard themselves financially. Whilst the risk of litigation cannot be eliminated completely, business owners that implement some risk management in their stores will not only demonstrate to their customers that they care about them, but will also be able to mitigate the possibility of potentially devastating losses. Well, Simon Colman from SHA Specialist Underwriters joins me now to talk about this. Simon, thanks so much for your time this evening. Before we talk about some of those risk mitigation strategies, have consumers and businesses in South Africa fully accepted the effects of the Consumer Protection Act since it came into being?
Yeah, thanks, Siggy. I think that most consumers are aware of their rights. The National Consumer Commission did a very good job of marketing what those rights were. And we've certainly seen an increase in claims against retailers, and we can attribute part of that to people being more aware. So I think that, you know, it's been 5 years, nearly 5 years now, since the CPA came out. So it's definitely, there's been enough time for it to settle in.
What are some of the areas where businesses seriously need to think quite carefully, particularly, as you say, with consumers being very much aware of their rights?
Look, a retailer should really look at the CPA as a blueprint to good customer service rather than something big and scary. So, you know, to have warning signs telling consumers that there's a potential hazard as they enter a building, that just makes good business sense, and it's the right thing to do. So it shouldn't be too much of a stretch to expect that. I was walking in a shopping center a couple of weeks ago, and I witnessed one of the cleaners waving the wet floor sign around to dry the floor, almost hitting a customer that was walking past.
Oh no.
So yes, I suppose there's a wrong way of using a sign as well.
I've seen that, actually.
The other thing, the other thing that I think businesses are unaware of is, you know, they're often importing products from other countries, and it's likely that the language spoken in that country may not be a language that's spoken in South Africa. And in fact, you still see some products that look like they've used Google Translate to come up with the warnings or the labels. And of course, that's completely contrary to the Consumer Protection Act. And if that consumer were to be injured, that retailer would have little chance of defending themselves successfully. And let's face it, you know, if you've imported products from a foreign country, particularly where, say, English isn't the first language, the likelihood of you as the retailer being able to get some kind of recourse from the supplier is really next to nothing. So you'll really be left carrying the can. So business owners really need to take the initiative and get these things translated and make sure that their products comply with local legislation.
And what about quality control checks? Is that a requirement?
It is, you know, but the CPA does allow for the retailers to have a little bit of wiggle room, if you want to call it that. I mean, it's physically impossible for a retailer, let's just say a supermarket, to check every single product that's on the shelves, especially with food. I mean, you can't open every tin of beans and check that there's nothing in there because you won't be able to sell it afterwards. So there is a little bit of latitude for retailers, but they really have to ensure that the people that they're dealing with, their suppliers, are reputable, and that the products that they're putting on the shelves are safe for use and that are fit for purpose. And if they don't, yet again, you know, you're going to have a lot of angry consumers, possibly some injured ones. And the law is definitely going to be on their side.
When one listens to the complaints that come through, whether it's in call-in talk shows or in newspaper columns, one gets the impression that managers or staff aren't trained on things like return policies, for example. What do businesses need to do about training staff?
Yeah, that's really important. And I just want to say this. Some businesses have trained their managers and their sales staff, and we find that consumers have been misinformed as to what their rights are. I'll give you a great example. Somebody that buys something and then changes their mind the next day and wants to return it, they don't really have any protection under the CPA. that store can impose whatever return policy they like on that. It's the ones where the product is actually damaged or there's something wrong with it where the CPA steps in and says there's a 6-month implied warranty. And that, I think you're right, is where you find a lot of retailers not being aware of the fact that there's this 6-month implied warranty. And if they don't train their staff, a situation that could have potentially been resolved over the counter then turns into a messy debate, possibly some litigation. Training critical and probably quite an easy fix.
And very quickly, what sort of policy options do businesses have to protect themselves as well?
If you're doing business in South Africa, you've got to have a broad form liability policy. They should chat to their insurance brokers about that. And that would have some products cover and some cover for people that are actually injured on the premises. But if you're trading in South Africa and you don't have that, I'm afraid that's probably going to be a business that doesn't last very long.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks for your time today. Simon Colman from SHA Specialist Underwriters joining us from our studios in Cape Town. Now, Brazil's currency has fallen to its weakest ever level against the dollar. This as political disputes over spending